Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for a deep dive that's going to really get you thinking.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Today we are diving into The Price of Tomorrow, the book by Jeff Booth.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of this one.
We're going to be specifically looking at his conversation with Eric Stacks
Okay.
about Bitcoin and how it plays into the whole big picture of the economy.
Right, because you can't really separate Bitcoin from everything else that's going on, can you?
Exactly. And that's precisely what makes this conversation so fascinating.
I'm intrigued. So what's the core idea here?
Booth's central argument is that technology should be making things cheaper, like deflationary.
Yeah, that makes sense. Innovation usually drives prices down, right?
Right. But instead, it seems like everything is getting more expensive.
Tell me about it.
And Booth says that this isn't just some random coincidence. It's a symptom of a system that's fundamentally at odds with itself.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. The age-old battle between inflation and deflation.
Exactly. But he brings in a whole new perspective with Bitcoin. And having Eric Staggs there, who's really seen these deflationary forces in action firsthand, well, it just adds this whole other layer.
Yeah, that's a perspective you don't often get. Someone actually living it, not just theorizing about it.
Right. Like, have you ever stopped to think about how much you paid for your first computer?
Oh, man, don't even remind me. It was a dinosaur, and it cost a fortune.
Right. But now you can get something many times more powerful for a fraction of the price, right?
It's mind-boggling when you think about it.
That's deflation in action.
You're getting more for less. That seems like a good thing, right?
It should be. But, as Booth points out, our current financial system, the one built on debt, it needs inflation to survive.
It's like they're two sides of the same coin, but they can't coexist forever, can they?
And that's the tension that Booth highlights so brilliantly.
So it's like a tug of war between these two forces.
Exactly. And he throws out this stat that's just, unbelievable. Over just 20 years, global debt skyrocketed by $185 trillion. Trillion, with a T.
That's an insane amount of money.
Meanwhile, global GDP, the actual output of goods and services, the real stuff, only grew by $46 trillion.
So we're piling on debt just to keep our heads above water.
It's like we're on this financial treadmill going nowhere fast.
Okay, so where does Bitcoin fit into all of this?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Booth brings up Bitcoin as this fixed, immutable digital asset.
Right, the total supply is capped, unlike our current system where they can just print more money whenever they want.
Exactly. And this is where we bump into that common question, if Bitcoin is supposed to be deflationary, why does its price in dollars keep going up?
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does. But here's the thing, that price we see, whether it's in dollars, euros, whatever, it's actually reflecting a much bigger shift. Some are calling it a great demonetization.
Meaning?
It's not so much that Bitcoin itself is becoming insanely valuable, though it is, but that those traditional currencies are losing their purchasing power at an alarming rate.
It's like we're so used to measuring everything in dollars, we forget that it's just one piece of paper in a sea of constantly fluctuating value.
Exactly. Booth talks about breaking free from that dollar-centric thinking,
Right.
which is hard to do, but once you see it.
It's like a whole new world opens up.
Right. He uses this really helpful analogy where he compares currencies to pieces of paper, each with a value that can change on a whim.
So the dollar is just one piece of paper among many. Suddenly it doesn't seem so secure, does it?
And this is where holding large amounts of any fiat currency, whether you're a company or an individual, starts to feel very, very risky.
Especially when you compare it to something like Bitcoin, which is designed to be scarce, like digital gold.
It's the difference between storing your wealth in a leaky bucket versus a reinforced vault, right?
Exactly. But if Bitcoin is as tamper-proof as everyone says it is, where does the conflict come in?
That's the million-dollar question. Booth argues that while Bitcoin itself is incredibly secure, the real fight is happening on what's known as Layer 2.
Layer 2, what's that?
It refers to the financial products and services being built on top of Bitcoin.
Okay, so you can't manipulate Bitcoin itself, but you can try to control how people use it and access it?
Exactly. Think about those ETFs that track Bitcoin's price or those custodial solutions offered by those big financial institutions.
So instead of buying Bitcoin directly, people are being funneled toward these, well, let's say, more familiar options.
That might not be in their best interest in the long run. It's like sneaking in the side door when the front door is wide open.
And a lot of people might not even realize it. They're just trusting the same institutions that have always been there.
That's the thing about paradigm shifts, isn't it? We're so used to the old ways of doing things that we don't even recognize when a better alternative comes along.
It's like that old saying, we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. We're so accustomed to thinking in terms of central banks and fiat currencies that the very idea of a decentralized, trustless system seems foreign, even dangerous to some.
And that's exactly what Booth is challenging. He's saying, hey, what if there's a better way? What if we can break free from these old systems that no longer serve us?
It's a powerful message, but is anyone listening?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? But Booth seems optimistic.
Well, from what I'm hearing, he's got good reason to be. But optimism alone won't change the world. It takes action, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that's something we're going to explore further in our next part.
Can't wait.
You know, it's funny how we talk about these huge shifts, these paradigm shifts,
Right.
but it's hard to really wrap your head around what that actually means,
Yeah.
until you come across something that just completely challenges how you see everything.
It's like you've been looking through a tiny window your whole life, and suddenly someone throws open the doors to a vast landscape.
Yes, that's a perfect analogy.
Mm.
And I think Booth's idea of Bitcoin's, what he calls implied value, is definitely one of those door-throwing open moments.
It's a real mind bender, for sure. How does he even begin to quantify that?
Well, he kind of lays out this thought experiment, almost like a back-of-the-napkin calculation, but on a global scale.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Walk me through it.
So he says, just imagine taking the entire global balance sheet, everything, all the assets, all the debt, and using Bitcoin's fixed supply, those 21 million coins, as our measuring stick.
Instead of using the dollar or the euro or whatever, we're using Bitcoin as the benchmark.
Exactly. What would that tell us about the true value of Bitcoin?
Well, considering how much fiat currency is sloshing around out there,
And don't forget all the other assets, real estate, precious metals, you name it.
it's got to be an astronomical number, right?
Astronomical doesn't even begin to cover it. Booth actually runs some numbers, and even with what he admits is a very conservative estimate.
Let me guess, we're talking millions per Bitcoin.
Oh, we're way past millions. He lands somewhere in the neighborhood of $42 million
Per Bitcoin.
per Bitcoin.
So you're saying that if we were to suddenly switch over to a Bitcoin standard, my measly savings account would?
Would be worth a whole lot more than you think, at least in theory. But that's just based on today's figures.
Right, because as the global economy grows.
And more of that value, that real-world value, flows into the Bitcoin network.
That $42 million starts to look like, I don't know, the opening bid at an auction.
It's mind-blowing. But here's the thing that I keep coming back to. It's easy to get caught up in these huge numbers.
Oh, absolutely.
But the real challenge is wrapping our heads around the scale of the shift that Booth is talking about. How do we go from where we are now, where most people still think in dollars and cents,
to this future where Bitcoin potentially becomes the dominant store of value? Yeah, that's the million Bitcoin question, isn't it?
Right. It seems like this impossible leap.
It's like trying to explain the internet to someone back in the 1950s.
Or like those articles you see from the 90s where they're saying the internet is just a fad.
And now look at us, we're practically living inside the internet.
Exactly. But, when you think about how people reacted to the internet back then, it's kind of similar to how some people react to Bitcoin now, right?
You've got the early adopters, the ones who just get it, and then you've got the skeptics, the naysayers.
And the ones who are just plain scared.
Which is understandable. It's new, it's different, it challenges everything we thought we knew about money.
It breaks all the rules. And that's precisely why Booth stresses the importance of approaching Bitcoin with a sense of curiosity, not fear.
Don't just dismiss it out of hand. Do your own research, ask questions, form your own opinions.
Exactly. The more people who take the time to really understand Bitcoin,
The smoother this transition will be.
it's not about becoming some kind of overnight expert. It's about taking those first steps.
Dipping your toes in the water.
Exactly. Attend a meetup, buy a fraction of a Bitcoin, just get some skin in the game.
Take control of your financial future.
Because that's what this is all about, isn't it?
It's about empowering individuals.
And what's so interesting? Booth talks about how the real battle for Bitcoin's future, it's not some big epic showdown between governments and revolutionaries, though there might be some of that.
Right.
He says it's actually happening on a much more personal level.
In the hearts and minds of individuals.
Exactly. He calls it a choice of attention.
Where are we focusing our energy?
Are we obsessing over the flaws of the old system, the system we claim to be fighting against?
Or are we actively directing our attention, our time, our resources towards building something new?
Because every time we choose to learn about Bitcoin,
Every time we share that knowledge with others.
every time we choose to actually use Bitcoin to make a purchase or send some money to a friend,
We're making a statement. We're putting our money where our mouth is.
exactly, we're not just opting out of a system that's, let's face it, designed to benefit a select few.
We're actively building a more equitable, transparent alternative.
And that's where it gets really interesting. Because some people might hear this and think, okay, so it's all about individual action, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. If you're not on board, that's your problem.
Survival of the fittest.
Right. But Booth isn't advocating for some kind of ruthless, every man for himself approach. In fact, he points out what I think is one of the most fascinating paradoxes of Bitcoin, which is that by acting in our own self-interest, by choosing to protect our own wealth and embrace a system that actually rewards honesty and transparency,
we inadvertently benefit everyone.
it's like some kind of karmic economic judo.
It's the opposite of a zero-sum game.
Exactly. How does that even work?
Think about it. As more people choose to store their wealth in Bitcoin, the stronger the network becomes,
The more valuable it becomes.
which in turn accelerates the shift towards a world where sound money is the norm, not the exception.
So even if someone's initial motivation is purely self-preservation, just a desire to protect their wealth from inflation and uncertainty,
Their actions still contribute to a better outcome for everyone.
it's like this ripple effect of positive change.
And it completely flips the script on traditional power dynamics, which is something that Booth is particularly interested in.
Because if Bitcoin really takes hold, if it becomes the dominant global currency, wouldn't those in power, those who have benefited most from the current system, wouldn't they stand to lose the most?
It's a distinct possibility.
So what do they do?
Well, Booth suggests that even those entrenched in the old system, the ones who've made their fortunes through manipulating fiat currencies,
They're not stupid. They see what's happening.
they're starting to realize that Bitcoin isn't going away.
Well,
If anything, it might be the only lifeboat available when the inevitable storm hits.
it's a high-stakes game of chicken.
Cling to their dwindling power and risk losing everything.
Or embrace the new paradigm, convert their wealth to Bitcoin, secure a legacy in a system that rewards fairness and transparency.
Only time will tell who blinks first.
You know, that actually makes me incredibly optimistic. Because if even those who benefit most from a broken system are starting to see the writing on the wall,
Maybe a fairer, more abundant future is closer than we think.
it makes you want to go all in, doesn't it?
Or maybe just start with a fraction of a Bitcoin. Every Satoshi counts.
Right, right. Baby steps. But seriously, what we're talking about here, it's not just about investing in some new technology.
It's about questioning the very nature of value,
The nature of power.
the nature of money itself.
And while it's still early days,
The potential impact of this shift is too big to ignore.
it's a lot to take in, right? We've covered so much ground, from those deflationary forces to that crazy idea of Bitcoin's implied value.
And we can't forget about layer 2. That's where things get really interesting, but also a bit more complex.
It's easy to get lost in the weeds, for sure. But the main takeaway here is this isn't just some theoretical debate.
This is real-world stuff. This impacts all of us, whether we realize it or not.
Yes. Exactly. Booth and Stacks, they both emphasize that you don't have to be some kind of coding whiz to wrap your head around this.
You don't have to become a cryptography expert overnight.
Baby steps, right? You don't have to go out and buy a whole Bitcoin to get started.
You don't even have to buy a tenth of one.
Even buying a tiny fraction, a Satoshi, it's like dipping your toes in the shallow end of the Bitcoin pool.
Before you dive into the deep end.
Yeah.
And speaking of diving in, once you've got some Bitcoin, even a little bit, that's when things get really interesting. That's when you start thinking about self-custody.
It's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Yeah.
Because this isn't about handing your money over to a bank and hoping for the best.
With Bitcoin, you have the potential to be your own bank. You are in control, but that comes with responsibility.
Which means keeping your Bitcoin safe.
Safe from hackers, safe from anyone who might try to take it from you.
Okay, I have to admit, that part always makes me a little nervous. It seems kind of complicated.
It can be, but there are so many resources available to help you, even if you're not a tech person.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, a good place to start is looking into hardware wallets.
Hardware wallets. Okay, what are those?
They're basically these little devices, small enough to fit in your pocket, and they're designed specifically to store your Bitcoin offline.
Offline. So not connected to the internet.
Exactly. It's like having little Fort Knox for your Bitcoin, tucked away safely where no hacker can reach it.
I like the sound of that. But how do I even know where to start? How do I choose one? How do I set it up?
Don't worry, there's a ton of information available online, step-by-step guides, video tutorials, you name it. And the best part is, you don't have to figure it all out on your own.
Because there's a whole community of people who are already deep in the Bitcoin world, right?
Absolutely. And they're incredibly welcoming to newcomers. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There are online forums, social media groups, even in-person meetups.
I've heard those meetups can be really cool, like a whole different world.
They're energizing. It's inspiring to be surrounded by so many people who are curious, eager to learn, excited about building a better future.
And it's not just about the tech either, right? There's a real sense of community, a shared purpose.
It's about connecting with like-minded people, sharing knowledge, supporting each other on this journey towards greater financial sovereignty.
Because at the end of the day, this is about so much more than just some digital currency, some investment opportunity.
It's about questioning the old rules of finance, the rules that have led to so much inequality and instability.
It's about taking control of your own financial future, and in doing so, contributing to a better future for everyone.
And that's a really powerful message to end on. We've only scratched the surface here today, but hopefully this has given you a taste of what's possible.
If you're intrigued, and I have a feeling you are, don't stop here. Dive in, explore, ask questions, and discover what Bitcoin can mean for you.
The beauty of this space is that it's permissionless. You don't need anyone's approval to get involved.
You don't need a fancy degree or a Wall Street connection. You just need an open mind and a willingness to learn.
So keep learning, keep questioning, keep building, because the future of finance is in our hands.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, until next time, happy diving, everyone.